Hello, everyone. I am Corey Andrew Powell. Welcome to Motivational Mondays. And today we are honored to have Dr. Amara Pope with us. She's a TEDx speaker, a PhD in media studies, seasoned professional marketer, and she specializes in diversity, inclusion, and dedicating over a decade to breaking barriers and building brands. Dr. Pope, welcome to Motivational Mondays.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. My pleasure. As we were talking before we started recording here, I love this conversation. It's timely. It's for some reason provocative. Um, I would love to take before we begin. I would love to get your take on what seems to be this current movement of removing DE&I efforts across campuses and businesses. It's alarming to me. What's your take on it?
Well, I believe that, like many social movements, things come in trends. So I believe that right now we're going through the downwards part of that trend. It's no longer popular culture, popular news. And needless to say, it's as important as ever, but yet without kind of big headlines happening in the news streams, it seems to be something that educational sectors as well as the different industries and in workplaces seems to less prioritize
Hmm.
in their day-to-day business. And we saw a big uproar with political movements and social movements in 2020 when we
Right.
had a lot of Black Lives Matter movements reinvigorated and we had a lot of sensitivity around just the way we speak about people, the way we address music and categorize individuals. But
Mm.
now we're seeing that kind of downfall of that 2020 movement. And it's unfortunate because, again, these situations haven't technically been amended, but they're out of trend.
Yeah. It also seems to be, unfortunately, historically, it's a step backwards
Yes,
because a
definitely.
lot of these things were not surfaced. They were attempts to actually correct what was already problematic. And so that's where, for me, it's like, well, we're not trying to give people things that they didn't deserve. We're trying to correct years of or centuries of them not getting what they were should have been had access to themselves. It's a really weird sort of dilemma. Um,
Agreed.
yeah.
Agreed. And again, I believe that a lot of these things were put into popular culture because a lot of celebrities, a lot of people were trying to engage in these kind of discussions years ago. And now
Hmm.
that it's kind of pushed out of popular culture, it seems to be a less relevant topic to the mainstream media outlets and as
Right.
well as educational sectors in the industry. So I believe that it's nothing that's been resolved. A lot of it's been surface level and then just brushed over again for the tomorrow's news.
Right. Yeah. It also reminds me, I mean, because a lot of your work deals with intersectionality. And
Yeah.
for you, it's like the topics of like race and nationality. For me, it would cover like sexuality and race and ethnicity. And my friends and I always laugh at in a similar way how like every June, here come the rainbow flags, like
Mm.
at every store and, rainbows everywhere. And then like July 1st, there's like a white paint going over
Yeah.
everything. So we need people to sort of be allies like year round.
Mhm.
And I
And
think,
and I was going to
please.
say too, with Black History Month, again, that was something that there was a big uptick in having a lot of public speakers coming out and being invited to do panel discussions, and then died down again for the rest of the year. So I
Right.
totally agree
Yeah.
with that in different intersections of identity.
And it's always funny with that month too, because I do find myself every year inevitably is like, well, in all the cases I'll hear, we don't have a straight people month. I'm like, okay, we're not going to really, really, and then I get the whole thing, white people don't have a month. I'm like, no, but you have the other 11. So can we have this one? It's kind of funny. So anyway, I have to laugh at it because it's actually otherwise angering. But
Yeah, humor is the best way to deal with a lot of these issues.
oh yeah, right. It's because they're so serious, and so
Mhm.
I try to alleviate it a little bit with humor. So, which brings me to something else, which is great.
Yeah.
I know your work deals with marketing,
Mhm.
when it comes to even with brands and how they communicate with certain groups and certain identities. Um, I always think that when there's these really obvious missteps when brands attempt to talk to certain groups, I always say, I wonder if they had anyone of that origin in the room when they made those decisions. So are you finding that you see more people in decision-making positions when it comes to marketing, or are you still walking into like a boardroom of like it's all white people and you're like, well, maybe you guys should try a different language in this, or how what are you seeing as far as the trends?
Well, when I conducted my PhD research, I looked at the music industry in particular and the Canadian music industry more in the genres of R&B and hip hop.
Hmm.
And my case studies were focused on Drake, Justin Bieber, and Jessie Reyes. So I looked at their kind of rise to fame, the history of Canadian R&B and hip hop, as well as what they were doing in the contemporary space. And when I was looking at the contemporary space, it happened to be 2020 when there was the reinvigoration of Black Lives Matter movements,
Mm,
a lot of cultural marketing. So I looked at how those three artists participated in cultural marketing. And during that time, precisely in 2020, Jessie Reyes came out with a quote and she stated in an interview that of all the people that are part of her music label, the people in decision-making powers were majority white males.
mm,
And so she was saying, although she tries to participate in all these different spaces, the people that are trying to direct her music industry and music label are predominantly white males. So
mm,
it continues today. And she's trying to participate in cultural movements. But again, the decision makers are from a specific mentality or background. So I think
hmm.
that, having the exposure of having more people of different identities represented in the decision-making processes are still lacking. And that was just the music industry. I've been participating in marketing in multiple sectors. Construction, tech is where I'm at right now, but
Mm.
I've worked in finance, I've worked in mining, I've worked in so many different sectors and
Wow.
often been the only quote unquote colored female in the room. So
Right.
from firsthand experience, I can say that, it's still lacking as well.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because we talk about that in the sense of like organizations and businesses, but that dynamic, of course, as we know, it's prominent in social issues. Right now, the abortion conversation, for example, every time I turn on the TV, it's like a bunch of like old, well, they can be any color, but it's primarily old white men
Hmm.
talking
Hmm.
about what women should be doing with their bodies. And it's like, how are we in that place in 2024? So, and then you're telling me it's happening, somewhat still in marketing. It's like, well, have we made any progress at
Hmm.
all, really? I
Hmm.
mean, how do you gauge if we're making progress at all if you're still seeing that in your work?
Yeah, and I think that it was really great for just conducting my research personally because what I found was these three artists, Drake, Justin Bieber, Jessie Reyes, very different backgrounds. So to
Mm,
give context, Drake is a biracial
yeah.
Toronto Canadian artist who participated in, hip hop, R&B, pop music. Jessie Reyes is a second generation Canadian Colombian woman participating in this mixture of R&B, hip hop, and pop. We have Justin Bieber, who's a white Canadian small town Ontario boy participating in hip hop, pop, and R&B
Right.
music. So
Yeah.
we have seen some progress just in that genre specifically where my focus was. But again, that's just a case study. We could see that occurring in multiple different industries, multiple different music genres as well. How Beyonce and a lot of colored identities are participating in country music and they're
Mm,
getting their space and they're getting their voice in places they would often been pushed out of traditionally. So
yeah.
we
Yeah.
are seeing progress, but it's slow coming. It's been a long time coming. There've been a lot of people kind of pushing on the up movements and the uproars, but we have artists standing on their shoulders now to say like we're getting there. We're making progress. So
Hmm.
from first-hand experience in the marketing world, I'm seeing some movement, of course, but again, still a long way to come. Yeah.
Well, when you just were speaking about Drake and Jesse Reyes
Justin
and
Bieber.
Bieber, right? I almost said Justin Timberlake, but
Close.
because yes, and because he's actually part of what I was going to say, which is I would love to talk to you a little bit about your. It is just personal thoughts because you really don't. I don't
Yeah,
think
yeah, of
talk
course.
about this much, but the notion of appropriation when it comes
Hmm.
to cultural stuff, and especially in the we're talking about the music industry, so. I see someone like Justin Timberlake and I see someone like Justin Bieber who have benefited greatly from what could easily be argued a borrowed sound of a particular group of people, demographic.
Hmm.
Um, and I struggle with the appropriation thing because I think it's really great when other cultures actually sort of they are uplifted by and they emulate what they see and they think it's actually something that they want to celebrate. I think the problem with that happens when they're not giving credit, I think, from where the originators came from. But the reason why I bring that up is because the George Floyd thing. Is like I always see Justin Timberlake or Justin Bieber at all the black radio stations when it was time to promote their music. I didn't necessarily see them taking to the internet saying George Floyd, or participating in the protest for Black Lives Matter. So there's this really weird balance where people kind of I think the appropriation argument is if you're going to take the best of us, we need you to also work with us on some of the difficult stuff as
Hmm.
well. So in
Hmm.
your line of work, do you see any sort of work that deals with people having any uh, thoughts about cultural appropriation and where that lies, and how do you remedy that?
Yeah, that was a huge section actually of my PhD research.
Oh,
I'm
oh,
looking at, yeah,
great, great.
appropriation was a huge chapter because what I'm looking at, a section of a chapter, because what I was looking at was how Canadian artists are participating in R&B when R&B is itself is traditionally associated with Black America. We have
Mm-hmm.
multiple Canadians of different ethnicities participating in that space now.
Mm-hmm.
So having Justin Bieber be a white Canadian trying to create R&B music creates a lot of space for deliberation on whether or not he should be allowed to participate in the space
Mm.
or to what degree he can participate in the space. Same
Right.
thing with Drake. He's biracial. Jessie Reyes, she's a woman, which is also, a very male dominated space,
Mm-hmm.
and a Canadian, second generation Canadian. So when I discuss these three artists, I purposely quote them as they're talking specifically about their participation. And Drake had a really interesting quote when he said that appropriation to him is, and again, paraphrasing, you can go to the dissertation for the direct quote, but
Right, right.
paraphrasing, he essentially said to the sentiment that unless you're paying homage and you're helping advance those cultures, it's appropriation. But you have the
Mm.
right to participate in those spaces if you're
Right.
influenced by them. And Justin Bieber says, directly quoting, that he was influenced by Black culture. So if you can say that, but also have the real steps, like real tangible steps towards uplifting those voices and equally participating in the space to an
Mm-hmm.
extent, then I think you can participate. But if you're participating, appropriating, and stomping on the people that have come before you and not paying homage to those people, not giving
Right.
voices to people in the same breath as you, in the same generation as you, then I would argue that that is appropriation. But
Yeah.
as someone that's Canadian, that loves R&B music, that isn't Black, that isn't from the US,
Mm-hmm.
I would love to have a right to be able to listen and participate equally as a fan who's also from the US and participating in that space.
Right.
Because I don't
Yeah.
come from the US, I'm not Black, but I love and appreciate the music. So
Right.
I came from it from that angle that, knowing that history is just as important as being able to equally participate in the space now.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, because that's the balance I was looking for. Because,
Mhm.
I push back a lot when people say, "Oh, that's appropriation," and I'm like, "Well, wait a minute. We should all sort of enjoy these gifts that we're bringing to each other culturally. Like, I don't mind that, a white person has cornrows. I just want them to understand where they came from. It's not just a
Right.
hairstyle. There's history." And then I would hear someone say, "Well, Beyonce has blonde hair." I'm like, "Yeah, that's a good point. She does, but she's not trying to be Marilyn Monroe. She just likes the hair color."
Hmm.
Is paying homage to probably the blonde bombshell. So,
Yeah.
it's a really interesting thing. And I think if we all just sort of respected each other and approach each other with a very genuine curiosity.
And I think that's a great way to say it. Just saying that curiosity, having that education and knowing that history, then
Hmm.
gives you, I think, a right to be able to engage in different spaces.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And I live well, I live in two places, but I have my one neighborhood is a very predominantly like Indian neighborhood, and I've been there for
Okay.
like 17 years. So all my neighbors and friends, and there's this little India street that I live near, and it's like my favorite street in Jersey City because it's like the most colorful, vibrant street with all the restaurants and like everything smells amazing. And I remember walking down the street going, I'm gonna go to the street like every day. This is my happy place because I was so curious about all the stuff in the window, and I'd go into shops. Probably I annoyed them, I'm sure, because so I was like, "So what does that do? Or what is this for?" But they began to like a lot of the shop owners. They would actually begin to really enjoy that they were talking about their culture to someone, and then I started to get questions,
Hmm.
and that's the cultural exchange. And I thought, this is what it's about, right? That's the genuine curiosity that I think we need to have, and it moves
Definitely. And
us.
I have a similar experience that I grew up in a predominantly white space. So I am from a small town in Ontario. I was actually born in Scarborough where there was a lot of diversity.
Yeah.
And then my parents moved us to a really small town where we were the only brown family in a corner house. We were the only brown family in town. I was the only brown girl in school.
Right.
I had a girl come up and ask me, were you born like that or did you tan a lot? And she just didn't, and I didn't take this as a little, in grade 2, I didn't take this with offense because she just
She
genuinely
didn't
didn't know.
know.
It had
Yeah.
lack of exposure to it. And I'm talking, back when I was in grade 2, this was before TikTok and Instagram,
Hmm.
and this was before all the social media craze. So when you don't have that exposure on broadcast media, when Canada was predominantly white,
Yeah.
they didn't have exposure to anybody that didn't really look like them. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
took that as an opportunity to educate them and, explain my parents are from Trinidad, they're from the Caribbean.
Hmm.
When I get into those details, I start bringing my food to school and it's different from everybody else's.
Yeah.
Genuine curiosity. And it was an experience I enjoyed because it was an educational moment. It wasn't, I mean, there was obviously moments of racism, but there were a lot of other positive moments where we just had that cultural exchange.
Hmm.
So I
See,
definitely,
you should have just gave them that first taste of roti, honey,
yeah,
and it would have been all over.
yeah. And my
Just,
mom's roti too. So
oh, I'm telling you, because I lived in Brooklyn, in
yeah,
my little neighborhood in Brooklyn, it was a Trinidadian restaurant. And when I tell
oh,
you every day, I was like,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, I could smell it coming through the windows. I was there
Oh
every
yeah.
day. They got like my
It's
whole paycheck, like every
it's
week.
intoxicating, but in the
It's
best
so
way.
good. Well, and you bring up a great point too, and I love that you mentioned that the fact that you didn't get offended by that because
Mhm.
which is strange, I've had in my life, which is we're young people relatively speaking, and I guess in
Yeah.
the history of the world, in my lifetime, I've had twice 2 trips to Europe where I was the first black person that 2 white children had seen in real life. The first time was
Mhm.
in 1999, and I was in like the northern coast of France. So it's not Paris, it's like really way out in the
No
outskirts.
metropolitan.
Right, at all. There
Yeah.
is none. I mean,
Yeah.
and he was about 4, and he just was like, and his father in broken English was like, "I'm sorry, my son never saw a black person in real life before," and that's like almost the year 2000. So I'm going,
Right.
wait, how is
Yeah.
that possible? But there were no black people in the town, and he's 4. He hasn't been
Mhm.
here very long,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
very similar experience in Germany, and they wanted to touch my hair in both instances, and it was
Mhm.
the most innocent, genuine child curiosity. So I was
Mhm.
like, there you go. And
It's funny you do the stare because I had the exact experience with my younger brother and I being in that small town. They would just,
mm, they're
just look.
fascinated.
Yeah.
Right, they're fascinated.
Yeah.
And it's honest. So, I think in that regard, and they were children, so it's honest and it wasn't done with
Exactly.
malice,
And
right?
and that's and that was the key difference. I think as an adult, I probably would have felt a bit more offended or taken back. But when it's a child, a classmate at that instance, you're
Hmm.
on you're in an equal playing field at that point. You're innocent
Yeah.
there, then it's different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just as to wrap that part of the conversation up, I just encourage everyone, if you're in those, for the adults in the room, if we
Mhm.
have those situations and you are curious, just respectfully ask questions respectfully. Don't touch people's hair without asking, because that happens a lot, because when I let this out, it's like boom, you know what I mean? And so what people will just kind of come at you with their fingers out. I'm like, wait, 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 let me say yes first.
Yeah.
And then,
There has
so
to be
just
kind
be
of consent
smart.
to that.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So that's wonderful though. Okay, so I know we just went on a tangent
I
on that.
know.
But I just had to talk about you talk about that stuff with you because you do have that background from an academic perspective. So I was really curious to know about what you thought. So let me ask you, so in today's increasingly like the more global marketplace, if you will, how do you encourage brands to more effectively be inclusive without seeming like they're pandering? Because
Mhm.
there's a fine line between how the public will receive you as being genuine, or like I gave you the gay pride story with the rainbows just for 30 days. So how do you
Right.
make sure brands are being really authentic with their efforts?
Right. I think that that's a difference between kind of representation, inclusion, and equity, So I love this analogy. There was an analogy I learned where they did it in like kind of 4 tiers. So the first tier is being invited to a party. It's great to be invited. You feel like you're participating. You're invited to a party. The next step is being invited to the party and being asked to dance. Now you're
Hmm.
participating in a way where you're interacting with others. Then the next step is being invited to the party, being asked to dance, and being able to dance your own way comfortably.
Hmm.
that sense, you're engaging in a way that you're comfortable with, you're representing yourself, and you're feeling included. The last step, you're invited to the party, you're asked to dance, you're dancing your own way, and now you're contributing to the playlist. So that's
Mm.
actually changing the environment that you're in. And I think that's the key here. It's not just feeling represented, feeling included, but you're actually changing the environment, and you yourself are changing the area that everyone else is interacting in. So I
Mm.
think that's the way to have real change, is not just pander, as you said, to invite people to just stand there, but to also make these decision-making processes to change the way that we do things, the way that we see things, the way that the organization is made up.
It's so funny you say that because there's a woman I had on the show, uh, Eliza Van Court is her name, and she really had a different take on inclusion that was very similar to what you said. She goes, "Oh, I love the word, inclusivity, inclusion. It sounds nice,
Mm-hmm.
but just including someone is not the same as them being participatory and
Exactly.
active. Inviting them to contribute is different than inclusion. You can just check a box. Okay, got two black, two white, two Chinese, included,
Exactly.
inclusion, right?
Mhm.
You just summed it up. It's
Multiculturalism, but that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, if they don't have any contribution, I love that, allowing people, and I do believe that brands would be so much farther ahead. They can't get out of their own way sometimes. Brands would
Mhm.
be so much farther ahead if they looked at that beautiful diversity in their companies and get these
Mhm.
different ideas on maybe how to approach certain goals or missions. I think they missed the mark a lot. Is that something that you think um, is a factor in why you would promote diversity to a brand? Like maybe there's some ideas there they're not getting if they don't invite everyone in.
Definitely. And it's not just having the kind of the brainstorming, again, having somebody at the table, but changing the way they do things. It could be in the language they use, not just the people represented, but the scenarios they're representing. Again, the environment. Is it in your traditional North American kitchen where there's just the brand names that everyone's used to, or is there more diversity represented? It's just the little things in this setting, I think, would make a huge difference rather than just the visibility of the person that they're putting in a commercial.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. We want, and I think what we have now is if we look at Gen Z, for example, that's a
Mhm.
generation that is sort of more than most in recent years. That's a generation that is demanding that
Mhm.
corporate responsibility. They're
Mhm.
demanding to see more before they say yes, they'll work for you. So I think it's
And
it's becoming more important now.
I agree. And I think a lot of that too is just their ability to have that access to information. Again, maybe if my classmates had TikTok back then, they might not have had as many questions or had such a jarring experience
Mm,
when they met me. So I
yeah.
think it's the exposure that they're getting as well and the different viewpoints they're able to access now online.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I always say too, like, people sometimes give the internet a bad rap, but you just raised a great point. It's a wonderful, wonderful tool if we use it for, good things other
Right.
than, bad things. And we see it kind of going both ways often.
Hmm. Hmm.
Twitter X. But
Yeah.
just saying. So have you had any serious challenges though in your work when it comes to working with brands or, were there any obstacles when it comes to like maybe trying to convey the need for this level of diversity so we could be more successful?
I will say a positive experience and a negative one. So,
Cool.
one positive experience I had was when I was working for an investment firm and I was helping the company to rebrand and redevelop their entire website. So, it was not just the website, it was every marketing material out there. We were doing a complete brand refresh.
Mm,
And one of the first things they asked me to do for the website was, who are our hero images going to be? Like, who is going to be represented on this website? We completely stripped everything. And my priority was to look for diverse people to be represented and then have more inclusive language represented on the website. And that
mm,
to me was huge because that was my first goalpost. There was a
right.
million other things to do, but the company prioritized that. And then
Mm.
the individuals that we selected, we got to have them represented all across our different marketing materials.
Oh,
It wasn't your
lovely.
traditional old white men represented on every investment firm website out there,
Right,
and
right.
that
Yeah.
that to me was made such a difference every time you log onto the website. So
Hmm.
that was a great way for me to say we were making just a small difference, but it ended up being a huge difference in just the way the company was represented.
This is a great conversation, and I thank you for allowing me to be a little fun and silly with it because it's serious stuff. But, like we said, humor helps us go a long way. So thank you for being here today on Motivational Mondays.
Thank you for having me. It's been wonderful.